as is tradition, I mean, I have to say, welcome to Hot Ones, the show with hot questions and even hotter wings. I'm your host. My name is Karen. I'm on the People Ops team here at Negotiatus, and I am joined today by a wild cast of characters, our very own Zach and Tom, who are in the same room with me here at Negotiatus, as well as Erik and Dan, co-founders of ProdPerfect. Thank you guys for subjecting yourselves to this, this process. I'm really excited. We are going to be talking today about all of these folks' entrepreneurial journeys while eating wings of increasing spiciness. And because we've got 4 folks answering questions today, we're going with 5 wings instead of the traditional 10. We're going to give ourselves something to work up toward, I think. So bear with us. And I will also introduce the hot sauces as we eat them, because I know usually they're on the screen for you. So before we dive in, I want to ask the group here, the interviewees, how is everyone with spicy food?
Significantly below average.
Yeah, I would say same for me.
I find mayonnaise to be a little spicy. Like I'm afraid. I was having trouble sleeping last night because of how.
Erik, I'm sweating just looking at the sauces. So we'll see.
Yeah, I literally feel it on my forehead. Like I poured it out. I'm like, ah!
I'm not used to being the strong one here. I'm a 2 of 5, and I feel like I'm ahead of the curve.
Amazing. Well, with that being the case, we are going to dive right in with our first wing. Again, this is the Hot Ones Classic. It's about 1,800 Scoville units. All right.
Real wings here. Bone in.
All right.
Great. I'm doing good so far.
Very good.
Last time experience.
Good flavor.
Mm-hmm.
I could. Oh boy. Okay.
First question. What was the point where you knew you could transform your idea into a business or a company? I'll kick it over to Dan and Erik to start.
More you.
Evolving process. So each one had a layer of escalation to it. At the very beginning, it was, I suppose for me, I felt like I'd be an idiot not to take a shot at the market and opportunity. Like if I just went to another company trying to do something along the lines of what I was doing, they'd either do it wrong or I wouldn't do it big enough, and it'd be a disappointment not to take the shot. Then getting a couple co-founders was the next point. We're like, okay, maybe we got something, but we probably will be doing something different in 6 months' time. Then getting a couple of real customers, I was like, oh, we've got something here. Then I suppose it was actually getting people to invest money. Oh shit, this is pretty real now. Like this is really a business. That point in time, kind of mid-accelerator, that's really when all the pieces started to come together.
The interesting thing about that is we started a business before we had the idea. What we saw was a problem and a market. And we knew we had the smart to go get it. And like we had a vague idea of an approach. Like we knew data was going to be a part of it. We knew like a data dearth in QA was a problem and that it was solvable because the data's out there. But we didn't have the idea. And I think often you're used to like people waiting until they have the idea that they have a lot of conviction, like, oh, there's going to be product market fit here. Like I already know the product I want to build before I go start building it. And I think as long as I don't think that's strictly necessary. I think we figured out what our product would be about 3 months in.
Yeah.
We found a problem, or I found a problem that I loved, and then started chasing the problem. That then stayed an idea until I met my good friend Tom. because I met a few other potential co-founders prior, and the flip of the switch for me was it always felt like an idea when talking to them. And then when I met Tom, we got to a Starbucks, we started hashing things out, and I was like, we got a business on our hands. But similar to the way you guys said it, we had a business, but we didn't really know what the business was. So step one was meeting Tom. Step two for us was getting into ERA. So for context of everybody, that's how we know the ProdPerfect guys. ERA is an accelerator based in New York. And we did want that validation of we thought we had something, a product, a problem, you know, kind of all these different aspects of stuff. Once we got into ERA, we were like, we got it. We got a business, and now it's go time.
Yeah, one thing I would add to that too is I think it was Richard Branson quoted that just said the best idea is worth $8,500, something along those lines. One thing that we've definitely learned over the years is that we have to be very comfortable adapting the product to the need, and definitely what we are right now is far different from where we were 3 or 4 years ago. So definitely was getting into ERA validated that we had the right team, that we had identified the right problem, and we were approaching it. And that gave us the confidence. The day that we got in was the day that I dropped out of school and quit your job. So for us, it was definitely that accelerator.
Yeah. And so for those of you like thinking about your own company, which is like kind of the genesis of this particular Hot Ones was like, hey, what if I want to start my own startup? You don't have to have your product, right? Like the stereotype of like someone running on Silicon Valley being like, I have an app, right? Like you don't have to have that app. What you need to have is a problem that you're passionate about solving, and like an understanding that it is solvable in a way that the market has not solved yet. And like generally for yourself to build your own conviction, what you need to be able to tell yourself is like a story about why the market hasn't solved this form of problem yet. Is it that it's a technology windfall or a tailwind, right? Like technology has changed, we can take advantage of that now, nobody's gotten around to it yet. Is it, look, everyone, like Dan's idea was like, or Dan's approach was like, everyone is thinking about this the wrong way because of just like institutional inertia. And like that is compelling, right? That there's so much institutional inertia in the industry. But anyway, I'm over answering the question, but like if you have a problem to solve and you are dedicated to it and you have a good sense of why the market has not solved that problem yet, like that is where you want to get started and say like, okay, I'm going to put the effort into this to start developing it into a business.
All right, we're going to move on to the next wing. This is small axe peppers, green market hot sauce from the Bronx, local to New York, often found on the show. This is a 5,500 Scoville unit, so a little bit of a step up from the last.
It looks scarier.
It does
looks
look
noticeably
scarier,
scary.
right? Like it's almost like the more viscosity, the scarier it
It's
gets.
like an electric, like sewage green.
Green color.
Oh, definitely scarier. For sure.
Very flavorful.
Mm.
Which one is this? Los Calientes?
Mm-mm. Green market from the Bronx.
How many millions heat is this one?
Only 5,500.
3,500 million.
By the end, we'll get to 135,000. Whoa.
You know.
But actually,
All right. Question is, how did you find each other as co-founders? And at what stage did you allocate ownership stakes for each other, investors, and employees?
So back when I was in high school, I worked at a very tiny accelerator that was operating out of like the history department spring of my high school for this guy named Charlie. And my high school was a very tight network, and I got pretty close to Charlie, and he knew that I was very much looking for a problem to solve in like this type of area. After working with the accelerators and the companies in the accelerator, I think they also knew that I was able to achieve things on the programming side. So him and I were talking a lot, and he brought up Zach and his brother Matt pretty early on, back in like late 2013. So he made that original intro, probably. Take it from there.
Yeah, I can even go further back. So had an idea, wanted to turn it into a business. I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm bad at. I am not an engineer by any stretch of the imagination. One day I woke up and said I'm going to be an engineer, and I took 1 month of coding classes, which I hope I find at some point and share it with everyone, because it actually made me worse of an engineer at the end of the month. So I thought, okay, this is not going to work. I need to meet someone who is technically savvy, so filling the gaps that I didn't have, but who is equally as interested in learning, kind of my side of the house, finance, sales, operations, as I was learning their side of the house. This propelled me on daily meetup groups. Somewhere, somehow, I'm in the record books of how many meetups I've gone to, because I went to anything in New York City in and around finding a co-founder, and then specifically a technical co-founder. Met a whole lot of people, and I did this for about 4 months. So this guy, Charlie, who Tom mentioned, was my buddy who I would meet every other Monday at this bar, and we just complained to each other. I'm pretty sure that was the catalyst of like why we would meet. And I'm telling him I'm trying to meet, kind of like exactly the person who I wanted to meet. And then I wish you guys will meet Charlie at some point. Very big personality, because he's like, I got the guy. Stop meeting people. Got the guy. Got to meet Tom. So to say he called his shots would be an understatement, because he was exactly right. I met Tom and then instantly kind of jived and hit it off. And here we are.
Dan and I were quite fortunate. We've known each other since 2013. And I actually hired Dan. I was at a previous startup. I'd met that founder. I wasn't actually a founder. I was like a first hire, but I met him, but I was his like executive hire. Met him. He was my roommate, but he met me because he knew I was MIT. And like, that was it. But met Dan. So like series of wild events. We hired Dan as our lead software engineer. The hardware startup like 4 months later fell apart. Like it wasn't but Dan and I stayed best friends. And like a big part of like one of the reasons we knew we could work together was that a big part of our friendship was like sitting down with a beer and thinking about how to solve problems that were important to us. And so like we knew we both cared about the same problems in the world, which I think is very important being a co-founder, and that we just like think about solving them not in the same way, but in complementary ways, and that we just like liked spending time thinking about that stuff. And so like we actually knew we wanted to do work together before ProdPerfect became an idea or a direct idea. We've been talking about like AI and government for a long time. Regarding allocation, what we both decided immediately was that this was Dan's idea, and it was not going to happen without Dan. It could happen without me. Like I'm not a software guy, right? Dan needed a sales founder to join him, and like businessy, right, kind of founder to join him, which I had the skill set for. But that's actually that's a more out of the two of us, it's a more fungible commodity, that skill set. Now, no one was going to be able to work together like this team, but in terms of what we're bringing to the table, in terms of unique skill set and commitment, Dan's commitment at that time was much higher. We decided that we wanted a not 50-50 split. I originally proposed 33-67. Dan pushed me to 40-60 to have me have more skin in the game. That's where we ended up. And then investors, their allocation was we sell them as few shares as possible for as much money as possible.
We were in a camp where we were like, this isn't going to get off the ground unless we both commit. So as Tom even mentioned, he quit school and I dropped out of work and he quit school. It's the other way around. Same day. So we were like, we're in this together. The other musketeer here, who's my older brother, works at Negotiatus. He's kind of a little bit of an unofficial founder, because while we had enthusiasm, Tom and I had a ton of enthusiasm, we had a ton of grit, we had no money collectively, zero. So Matt was some early capital early on. So it was pretty easy for us to essentially be like, Tom and I have the same, Matt is a little less. That's how like basically we started. then very similar to you guys, you almost have to recalibrate ownership, equity every time you raise money. Because quite literally, new shares are being introduced. And then double down on you try to sell as few shares to investors for the highest price. And that's just what you do every round. We do something similar to what you guys do, actually. So it's pretty cool to hear that. So in our minds, we're like, we just need to make fair offers. And then in our kind of founder seats, we want people to get more equity. Like that's a great outcome for all of us. So the way we think about it is, what's a fair offer? Let's make it market. Let's kind of figure out where to start. And then you bring in great people to help career path and be like, if you perform this, then you go to the next year. We actually try to map this out as much as possible to give everyone visibility. Because another kind of funny piece to this is the visibility helps us as well, because we have to manage this whole pool. So we have to manage it with every new employee, every new investor. Maybe one investor wants to liquidate their shares. Like there's so many different, kind of pieces here. And then the one other thing I can comment on that definitely is surprising to some folks, but it's really hard to raise that first bit of money. So for scale, we have like 80 people on our cap table. So we have a massive cap table where probably that first round took me like 30 people, average check size of like 10 grand.
I think some are even less too.
Yeah, so just so you know, it'll all vary based on like how ownership is split up, but we fought some tough ones early on for that early capital. And the exciting part is all of those 30 people continue to invest as the rounds have gotten bigger.
We are going to continue on the journey. The next sauce is Heartbeat Pineapple Habanero. This is 12,200 Scoville units. Right.
This one looks appetizing at least.
Yeah, I think the flavor is going to be great.
Hey, for me.
You guys approach these sauces much differently. I do.
Better spicier.
Definitely kicked it up a notch.
Well,
Mm-hmm. The flavor is great.
It keeps getting hotter too.
it's starting to sweat a little
Mm-hmm.
Ooh.
There you go for it. I'm trying to fulfill the spirit of hot ones and suffer a bit.
They taste great and also have good heat. It's like the perfect combo. All right. The question is, do you think the days of garage startups are over? It seems like many founders of startups have a leg up from generational wealth these days. What are the biggest barriers to getting initial capital for founders starting at a disadvantage?
It's always been the case through all of history that if you have a bunch of money, it's easier to make money. Which is not new. We always have to be careful of back in the day thinking. So yes, if someone's born into wealth, like, do they have the option to sit around and like tinker as long as they want because they are working on, trust fund from their parents? Like, yeah, of course. But they're not hungry, right? Like, I can't discriminate on this, or in my hiring, but I love hiring people from lower middle class backgrounds or lower class backgrounds because they're hungry, right? And like, I come from like a farm out in the middle of nowhere. My first job, I made way more than my parents put together. And like, I'd say, regarding the actual like money and being able to sit in a garage, like I saved up a bunch, right? And I had, I've gotten very lucky along the way. Like I got an MIT, I was able to get a good job coming out of school. But I think I actually think like people that sit on a bunch of generational wealth, like have a disadvantage have a constitutional disadvantage in being a great founder because they're not hungry. And they haven't had to work for what they get. And they just don't understand. They don't understand the hustle. They don't understand the value of money. They don't understand so much of what it takes to be successful in a way that someone that comes from like humbler origins does understand really deep in here. The landscape has changed. And one of the ways that the landscape has changed is that compared to like the Microsoft days or the Atari days, right? There's far more early capital that's far more willing to make early bets if you're good, right? And so, for example, for both of us, the first money we got was an accelerator. These accelerators are prolific, they're well capitalized, and they will fund you if you have a good idea and, again, a good story about why you're the person to go get it, right? So we have to think about, just keep in mind like all the survivor bias of like, we have these stories of these old garage startups because they were already successful. But think of all like the stupid ideas people had that never got funded because they were dumb ideas, right? From the early 90s, we never hear about any of those. Whereas we hear about all of our friends with their app idea that never get funded, and their idea sucks, and they're not well positioned to turn it into a business, but they bemoan, like, rather than go like, maybe my idea was dumb, or like this isn't the right thing, right, to bring into the world. They bemoan the idea that like someone else has more money and it's not fair. I don't think so. So like, why am I so fired up about this? I don't want anyone thinking that, oh, I wasn't born into wealth and therefore like I'm at this huge disadvantage and I don't have opportunities to go really make something happen. Just for last thought, because I know I'm chewing up a lot of time. Dan and I, we started ProdPerfect with like full 5 months of runway, like personal runway from our savings.
Like, we have to do this, or we're going to go broke.
Right, we will go broke. And it made us hungry. It's why we moved so fast. It's why we were selling stuff before the product was ready. It's why we were hunting for accelerators. It's why we're burning them midnight oil. And it was foundational to our success. Too much leisure will kill startups. Like, too much cushion kills startups.
Yeah, you have to be hungry. You have to be willing to go to war. You have to be willing to sacrifice both a lot, and also be willing to change who you are in the business. Like, the needs of the business will evolve, and if you're not paying attention to, or not willing to change yourself to meet those needs, you're not going to.
Yeah, I could jump in too. So with the context, I think what Dan said too is like comparing time periods is hard because you don't have the context of the time period. Knowing the context of this time period, I bet you there will be more relative garage startups because access to early capital is possible. So I want to double down on like, I actually think we're probably still in the earlier stages of it. A lot of people are raising funds, a lot of new early ideas are probably being funded earlier. So that's kind of one piece. Two, we have our anecdotes similar to your guys. Like for us, it was Tom dropped out of school. The word savings is ambiguous.
I was a camp counselor for a little while. That was the only paid job I had beforehand. So
the funny thing is I have again, one experience side, like I had just paid off student debts. Like I felt rich from paying off student debts, but I had no money to actually like put forward to stuff. But it just makes you a little bit more kind of prudent early on. Like when we were testing sales and marketing ideas, we were testing it with hundreds of dollars, and we were looking at these things like, let's see what's more successful, let's see what's not. You'll always need to raise money broadly, unless you're massively profitable and you want to run a profit, like cash flow positive business early on, different models. But for this group, it's probably gonna be like a venture, idea. The funny thing is like, how much generational wealth do you need to actually sustain this long term? You need like hundreds of millions of dollars theoretically. So I'm more in the camp of like, obviously with some exceptions, if you have an unlimited amount of money, yeah, it's probably easier to start stuff. Absent that exception, yeah, take the young, hungry, scrappy guy or gal any day, because they learn faster. They're, it's the straight from a sitcom, it's 11 p.m. You haven't had an outcase, you haven't had an order in 3 days. Like when things appear kind of grim, you actually just don't feel sorry for yourself. You're on to the next thing because there's urgency, like there's built-in urgency. So I think it's a great question, but I actually view it as like the advantage goes with the hungrier person with the better idea who is willing to execute. Doesn't really matter your starting point because there's pros and cons to both, but best ideas win only when matched with best in class execution. Best ideas or money can kind of stay on the shelves without best in class execution.
It was really well said. And I think also like how you can go about starting something matters a lot too. It's like we didn't, just immediately jump full time into Negotiatus the second, we met each other and started thinking about it. Like Zach was working a finance job, which is notoriously difficult hours. I was a double major in school. And then on top of that, we were working, 8 hours a day on Negotiatus, like in the evenings, until we could get it to the point where we got into the accelerator and had some funding. And then even then, we were paying ourselves almost nothing for a long time. So
the concession we need to make is towards actual poverty, right? Where like if you're living hand to mouth, right, there is often rightfully so a need, you're sort of like you're lower down on Maslow's hierarchy, right? Like there's a need for like short-term economic security. That is a barrier to starting a startup. It's a barrier to taking the leap, right? Because taking the leap could literally put you on the street. I think like, and so with the concession to that, I think that's always been true. But I also, to Zach's point, like I think given how capital markets are changing and how the VC world is has a greater appetite from putting more money in sooner, right? Just like if you go look at Etsy on Crunchbase, their Series A was $1 million. Their seed round was $100,000, right? Our pre-seed was $100,000. Our Series A, our seed was 2.5 million. Our Series A was 13. So a lot more money, a lot more early on. And two, there's more social consciousness in not every VC, but socially conscious VCs exist. So I actually think that for people without generational wealth, there is more opportunity than there has ever been by far, to start a startup. And so yeah, I want to take that whole concern and just like flip it on its head, because you don't need generational wealth. You can, go make it happen.
We're gonna kick it up another notch. We're moving on to hot ones, Los Calientes, which is 36,000 Scoville units.
What was the last one?
12,000, so we're about 3x.
Oh man.
3x. All right, get going. Let's boogie.
At least one person got that.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Oh boy, just smelling it.
Yeah.
it was really hot.
Yeah. I was afraid of this one.
Oh, that's great.
Ooh.
I love it.
Our answers are going to turn into one-word answers. Yes.
Or no.
This is the perfect point for this next question. If you could rate from least to most stressful, the least to most stressful weeks of founding a startup, how would you rank the following weeks? First week, 10th week, first year or 52nd week, third year or 156th week, last week from today, or right this second eating these wings.
Honestly, I think the Series A, like right before the Series A, so what was that, 3 years? 4 years? 3 years from
3
when
years.
yeah.
3-year mark.
Right.
That's what was stressful.
I think that was the most stressful, and I think the least was like very early on because everything was just so like it was just building. It was so much fun.
Yeah.
Maybe it's also like looking back with rose-colored glasses a bit.
Least stressful today. I was looking forward to today. Even though I was stressed, I replaced it with enthusiasm. So least today. Second least early on. It might be the rose-colored. it really might be, but like you don't know. You like really don't know. You don't know. So you're just going for it. Like there's no structure. There's 20 meetings a day. You're trying to build product. You're trying to do sales calls, but like, who were the sales calls? Like I just tried to convince family members to use us. So it was a little bit of a different stress, but earlier days were less stressful. I agree with Tom. Leading up to the fundraise is for us always the most stressful. I actually was talking to Karen and Allie about this, where it's like you have to be an insane person to lead that charge, right? Because you're running out of money naturally, because when you're trying to time your fundraise, so you have less money than you did the day you fundraise, right? So you're leading up to a fundraise and you can't just spend, but your business is growing faster than it has previously, right? So like you're looking at something where you're like, I know what I need, but I just need time to kind of match it. So I agree. I think it's going to be leading up to fundraisers are going to be the most stressful, but it's like anxious excitement a little bit because you know what's going to happen on the other side, but you know the next 30, 60, 90 days are just going to be a little stressful to execute. There's also the execution pressure. No one wants to, I don't know about you guys, but you guys want to fundraise when your business is pitter pattering a little bit? Not really. So there's also that stress of execution. So I think it's going to be stage specific, but I'll say 3 years in was probably our most stressful to date. And then 2 years in, so we'll go in time. The stress increases, but hopefully that doesn't dissuade you because your tolerance for stress increases at a faster rate.
I'd say at the very beginning, you got like nothing to lose. There's not much stress to speak of. And we're only roughly 3.5 years old to begin with. So the 3-year mark and the now mark is not terribly far away. Leading up to the Series A was certainly the high point for stress at the time. And then the highest was actually COVID hitting and us needing to sort of shift the product in a big way out of the consulting heavy focus that we had at the beginning to something much more product driven. That sucked. That was probably the biggest stress.
Yeah. Very much agree with Dan. I would put so I'm gonna benchmark with Hot Ones. Hot Ones is less stressful than everything since we started hiring people, and more stressful than everything before we started hiring people. And here's why. Before we started hiring people, so like week in, 10 weeks in, all that stuff, it's a game. Why is it just a game? Because it's impossible. What you're doing is impossible. You know it will fail, right? If anyone's like ever read any like Buddhist stuff, right? Like we were in peak Zen because we were like, there's this like Buddhist saying like this glass is already broken, right? And like, and so just the inevitability of failure meant like we're building sandcastles, right? When you're building a sandcastle, are you stressed about the fact that the sandcastle is going to get washed away? No, because you know it's going to get washed away, right? It's a little bit like if you've already missed your flight, it's less stressful having already missed your flight than maybe missing your flight. So it's that hanging on. It's like when you start becoming attached to the outcome, that's when things get stressful. And before we started hiring people, we weren't attached to the outcome. It's just a game. And we knew it was never going to work. But then it started working. And so week 1, week 10, 6 months in, absolute ball. Even when we'd hired Andrew, our first hire, it was still kind of fun because like Andrew was at a place in his career that like if we went down in a few months, he'd be like, fine, I'm out, right? But what starts to happen is you raise some money and then people start depending on you, right? And like other people's futures are tied to you. And like the further you get along, the more this becomes like a machine where people who join you, like their expectation is that you're going to stick around. And it's important in their career that you stick around, important in their well-being that you stick around. Even plays with kids, right? And so I think for me, the stress ratchets up the bigger the team gets, because it's not so much that like I need to get rich. And it's not even so much that I need to get the investors rich. Like if they lose all their money and they think I'm an idiot, like I don't care. It's not even their money, right? But It's the thing that the stress for me is I feel like it's kind of a solemn duty to do what's in my power to make sure that the people that work with me, that like I looked in the eye and said like tie your fortunes to me, right? To make sure that like I fulfill that promise that I made, that like this is a good choice, that working with us is a good choice. And so I think like it's really been, it was like no stress, no stress, no stress. There have been a few times like the most stressful moment was definitely, now for that same reason, the most stressful moment was when we were deciding whether we were going to lay off a large portion of the company, and we did it twice, right? We had 2 rounds of layoffs. It was awful, right? And so it was like stress, 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 misery, stress, 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 misery. And the stressful part was like, can we avoid this, right? And we were desperate to do it, and we failed. It was awful. So that was definitely peak stress for me. And but like the ramp of stress definitely goes up in time as like more and more people hitch themselves to our boat.
Well, I suspect things will about to be a little bit more stressful. We are introducing the final sauce, the bomb, which is often the turning point in Hot Ones if you have watched the show. And as is tradition, the last wing that is eaten it is optional for you to include a final dab, a last dab of the last hot sauce. Again, totally optional.
Not optional, last dab.
I will be partaking in the last dab.
What does the last dab mean?
Yeah, like.
It means you add 1 extra drop from the bottle onto the wing before you take the bite.
Got it.
I'm gonna go for mine here. I'll do it on camera, so it's not. There's no question. Ooh, that was on my. Sorry. Do it not above your computer.
Smells considerably worse
Audience says don't be soft.
than the previous one.
It's really lather it up.
Trying to get 1 drop.
Yeah, I feel like I'm already.
This one smells
easy.
All right.
Well, let's do it.
Cheers. Are we ready? Oh, Tom's getting his dab ready.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
Cheers. All right, let's do it.
God.
We salute you.
Oh my God.
Uh-oh.
Oh, come on.
Oh!
We're not doing okay. Oh no.
Uh-oh.
Oh!
Okay.
Oh.
Jesus Christ. Oh my God.
How are you drinking a beer?
It's non-alcoholic because it's the middle of the day, but oh Jesus Christ. Oh.
Oh, it's so bad.
All right.
Wow.
We're going in. Last question. What is 1 piece of advice that you wish you would have listened to earlier on?
The last dab was optional.
Don't do more than that.
Business or life?
Don't know.
Oh.
We got the questions a little bit ahead of time. You just said it, and I don't know the question.
What
Sweating
is 1
profusely.
piece of advice you wish you would have listened to earlier on in business or in life?
This is terrible.
1 piece of advice. I'm crying.
Eric, you said something. What was the piece of advice?
It was that the last dab was optional. The last dab is optional. That was the advice I should have taken. Oh my God.
It's getting worse.
Yeah.
It continues to fight you.
Crying.
Tears are streaming down my eyes.
I like don't want to blow
Oh God. Man's hubris.
I approached it very, very confidently.
Yeah. This is so much worse than every. Oh, I
This
can't
is
talk.
really bad. And it tastes bad. Like, why does this exist? Is my
What is
question.
the intended purpose for this hot sauce?
I mean, this, I think.
We're gonna need more milk soon.
Yeah, careful around the eyes. Careful around the eyes.
That was unplugged.
Ah, fuck you.
Yeah, thank you.
Does anyone need the question repeated?
Tom, you're up.
Jump over.
Yeah. I gotta stop sweating.
This one comes actually from one of Eric's mentors. That personal development is not a thing, it's the only thing.
It's Nat.
Yeah, that was Nat.
Tell us more.
Which is to say, I know I'm plugging for time now for everybody. Which is to say, in what you're doing, you're going to be the best at it. Never guarantee success. So, in everything that you're planning on doing, you have to have a plan for how you're going to get better at it. And ideally, each skill you build, each project that's a success builds on itself and builds you as a person on top of whatever achievement it is you're looking for.
I think the biggest one for me is surround yourself with the information and experiences of other people that have figured stuff out before, so you don't have to figure it out yourself. Which I think I wish looking back that I would have leaned more on like mentors and advisors to point us in the right direction, or point, especially like how we think about technology in the right direction, and a lot of people too. Other people we've run recently, especially Aaron Alley, two that we've added across product engineering, really helped us rethink a lot of how we approach problem solving. And I wish that we could have done that a little bit sooner, focus on that sooner. So definitely surround yourself with experiences that can put you in the right direction.
Apparently beer makes it worse, so I'm sticking them up.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it doesn't make it better.
this is going to be a little morbid sounding, but bear with me. The most important, like, advice or knowledge that I ever received was that, oh my God, it hurts to talk.
Oh yeah, for the record, I nearly threw up there. That sucked.
You just kept it together,
Oh yeah.
like Beyonce.
Oh, laughing hurts. Oh,
Not having milk in your mouth hurts.
Yeah.
Any
Yeah, it really hurts. Okay, so does anyone know what memento mori means? Remember that you will die. So why? Why is this my favorite advice? Because it compels you to get on with it. The greatest illusion that we have is that we have time, is that you can always get around to it later, right? One of the greatest illusions we have is that taking risks is risky. What do I mean by that? I mean that like you're gonna die. You're gonna be gone, right? And hopefully you'll be on your deathbed with time to reflect back. And if you are you gonna look back and say like, boy, I'm glad I didn't take these risks. I'm glad I did the safe thing. I'm glad I settled, right? I'm glad I had a 9 to 5. No, you're not. You're gonna regret it. And then you're dead because you're out of time. And we actually have this like insanely short amount of time. It is a psychological defense that we have to avoid going insane, to not think about death too much, but it's coming. It's right there. It might be tomorrow. It might, in fact, be tomorrow. And therefore, like, the idea that you would ever wait for a moment, right? For like some future thing to materialize, to be your moment, is like constitutionally insane, right? If there's something you want to accomplish on this earth, you need to start doing it now. That doesn't mean you have to like drop your job and start your startup, but it does mean that you need to make sure that like the job you're in, the time you're spending in it now, today, is directed towards building the things you need to do what you want to do next. So if you want to start a startup and you want to save money, save that money, right? And start saving today. If you want to develop certain skills, work with your manager, work with your founders and say, I want to develop these skills now. And it's like, it's mostly this like bullshit fear of like pain or discomfort. Like most people in the world are comfortably miserable. My parents were comfortably miserable together, and they were too afraid to get divorced. And most people I know are comfortably miserable in their jobs, comfortably miserable in their relationships, because they're more afraid of discomfort. And I've always said that like it takes courage to be happy. And what's going to give you that courage? Remembering that you will die, and soon. So think of the thing that like, think of like what is the uncomfortable thing that you need to do now in order to live your life, like really live it before you die, because you're running out of time. That's my advice. That's the best advice I ever got.
The advice I wish I had earlier was actually document your values and memorialize them. I think we actually did this as a company late. And in my head, I'm like, I know it, Tom knows it, Mitch knows it, one of our early employees, we got it. You need to remind yourself like why you're doing what you're doing. And then as the company grows, you need to attract and not sacrifice your values. So it sounds cheesy, but I can just map employees that have excelled here, showed the values at interview, showed it at the 30-day check-in, at the 90-day check-in, and build on it. That it's actually amazing to me that I discredited it early. I'm like, values, you gotta produce, we gotta, it's all about like output, like a lot of input, a lot of output, work a lot of hours, work. I think that is just flat out wrong. And I'm glad that I learned it when I did. Wish I learned it earlier, but I'm glad I did. So this was a good one in my head, because I've now seen both sides. In my head, I was like, not important. Instead of documenting values, like I could make 100 cold calls. That's just what I'd rather opportunity cost and do it. It's amazing, and it still happens where document your values, don't sacrifice them, and it's a force multiplier. And you don't realize it until you see it, but now we've seen it. I've seen it now 60 times, give or take. And then unfortunately with folks who it didn't work out, you overlook the values for something else. And there was always something else. It's so compelling. He or she was able to do that. It's always the reminder of like, it's not their fault. It's never their fault, because fortunately they've gone on to be successful elsewhere. It's great. It's a great outcome. We're not looking for like winners, losers here, but it's why are you doing what you're doing? Establish it early, and it builds. And then it multiplies quickly. Once recruiting is out of your hands and into other people's hands, they're able to recruit using the values, but it's like memorialize it, write it down. Culture changes. Company culture should change, but the values really shouldn't. This is why you're here. This is why you're doing it, and don't sacrifice it.
I would love to add to that, Zach, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
That for anyone out there who is thinking about putting together core values or thinking about leading with values, there's an amazing book out there by Ray Dalio called Principles, Work and Life. And it does a wonderful job of helping folks navigate identifying principles, applying principles, understanding how to navigate tough situations when occurrences happen that don't align with your principles. It's just a really great reference. So highly recommend from a people and value standpoint. I think this is going to be our last question of the day, from Sam Spencer. Was da bomb the spiciest thing you've ever eaten? And if not, what was?
You first.
Go ahead. Okay, fine. The spiciest thing I ever ate was, it was in China. He's at Beijing. I'd been living in Beijing for like 3 months, and I knew enough Chinese to be dangerous. Like people thought I knew what I was talking about. The reason this is relevant was that I went into a Sichuan, like if you know like Sichuan food, I went to a Sichuan like hole in the wall place, and I ordered a thing, and they said how in Chinese, they said how spicy do you want it, and I said medium spicy. I'll take medium. And I did not know what I was getting myself into, and it was because I'd asked for it in Chinese. They figured he may be white, but his Chinese is really good. He probably knows what he's talking about. So they didn't just give me like Beijing medium spicy. They gave me Sichuan medium spicy. And the moment I started eating it, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. And I started crying and snot coming out of my nose. But I was poor and I was hungry. And I was stubborn. I was a young man at the time. And so I decided I'm going to eat this whole fucking thing. And guess what they don't have in China? Milk. I was lactose intolerant. And I had this like big argument with her over like whether I was allowed to have cold water or not, because she was like, hot food and cold water is bad for your stomach. I was scarred by it, and I will never forget it. That was the spiciest thing I ever ate.
I was gonna say I own the Hot Ones, the Last Dab hot sauce, and I've had that before, and that was definitely spicier than Da Bomb, but somehow Da Bomb hurt a little bit more than that. So, yeah.
How many Scoville units was this one again?
135,000.
So Mark Scrappitz, who works in Negotiatus, I've known him for quite some time. And a couple years out of college, we're hanging out, me, him, and a bunch of friends. Someone happened to have a hot sauce there. There may have been a little bit of alcohol involved, but it was 1 million Scoville units. And we put it on a chip, one tiny, tiny, tiny droplet on a chip. And I will never forget what that experience was like, which did add to the anxiety of this, but at least having the million in my head and knowing everything was south of 1 million put me at ease, because it was horrific. It lasted for like hours. So I wouldn't recommend that.
I still feel like hot and tingly and on the verge of sweating from this. It was an experience.
It says this is permanent on Da Bomb's hot sauce. This is just us now. It's a steady state.
And I have to admit, I think this is the most of this kind of hot sauce I've eaten in a single sitting. I'm sure I've tried something like those little tiny dropper things, and not quite, not the same experience. This is probably the hottest like single item I've had in this quantity on a chicken wing.
Well, we made it. We survived. We lived to tell the story. Thank you, Dan and Eric, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for joining. If you have any questions, I think what we can do is maybe leave the question like form open for a couple days. And we'd love to, connect with you and answer any burning questions that might remain.
Thanks.
Negotiatus, thanks everyone. This is other than the last wing, it was a ton of fun. I hope you learned something. We love feedback. So let us know like what we can do even better next time, because this will recur.
Absolutely. Enjoy the rest of the Friday, all.
Awesome.
Peace.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend, y'all.
Later, folks.